ICU infections in pediatric age group. The main objective of this talk would be to describe specific clinical entities or infections which are seen only in children, and to emphasize some of the differences from adults in other conditions which may be seen in adults also, however, they are somewhat different in children. Why are these pediatric infections different? Main reasons are, one, that the anatomy in children is different. Let us take the example of laryngotracheobronchitis. It's a dangerous situation, dangerous condition in some of the patients. Main reason being that the subglottic area, which is the target of this infection, is very narrow in children. The next could be that immune responses are not fully developed, hence children may respond differently and present differently to the same organism, which the adults may show a different disease. Exposure to specific organisms like chlamydia, maternal or genital flora is another reason why these infections could look different in children. Children have developing organs, for example, the brain, the lung, and hence the consequences of the same infections could be very different. And finally, the drugs that we prescribe for the infections, for the antibiotics and the antifungals and so on, the pharmacokinetics and pharmacodynamics of those drugs could be different in children. Let's take a list of go through a list of the diseases which can occur in children and more or less exclusively in children. For example, bronchiolitis, acute laryngotracheobronchitis, retropharyngeal abscess, pertussis, diphtheria. These are the respiratory infections. Similarly, pneumonia, and in pneumonia, chlamydia pneumonia, mycoplasma, or even the classical pathogens may present differently. Aspiration pneumonia and cystic fibrosis. In the nervous system, febrile seizures can present as if it is meningitis and has to be differentiated and treated differently. Children commonly have sinus thrombosis, CNS sinus thrombosis, orbital cellulitis as a complication of sinusitis or de novo infections of this area. Brain abscess with right to left cardiac shunts is another situation which can occur in conditions like Fallot's tetralogy. In gastrointestinal system, diarrhea, dehydration, shock is still a major component of admissions in the PICU, and of course many of them are associated with severe sodium disturbances. Viral infections, measles, chickenpox, mumps, acute poliomyelitis, almost exclusively seen in children. Septic shock in children presents quite similar to adults, except that hypotension may not be a feature. It is not essential criteria for diagnosing shock. Poor perfusion of the skin measured by a delayed capillary refill time and such signs can define shock. When it comes to treating them, the principles are quite similar to adults. However, first dose of antibiotics, which we say must be given in first 1 hour or maybe maximum 3 hours, that guideline has to be followed in children also. However, getting a vascular access can be a challenge in some of these patients, and antimicrobials can be given intramuscularly or even orally if tolerated until the intravenous line access is available. This is included in the cerebral sepsis guidelines of 2013. In toxic shock syndrome, children are more prone to this condition than adults because of their lack of circulating antibodies to the toxins. And children with severe sepsis and erythroderma and suspected shock should be treated with clindamycin to reduce toxin production. Then the role of IVIG is not very clear in pediatric age group also. However, it may be considered in refractory toxic shock syndrome. That means if you don't start on day 1 and see that the patient is not responding, by day 2 maybe IVIG can be added. Let's take the example of community acquired pneumonia in children. Probable agents at various age groups differ, and in the early infancy, first 3 months, gram-negative organisms are the dominant organisms, main reason being that that is what the children have been exposed to from the maternal flora. Group B streptococcus again from the maternal flora. Streptopyogenes, chlamydia and viruses are also seen in this age group. However, when we come to the next age group of 3 months to 5 years, strep pneumoniae, Haemophilus influenzae B, these become the commonest organisms. And if the population that we are dealing with is such that they are taking vaccines for these two, then the incidence of these is coming down now. However, viruses continue to be the most common organisms in this age group. Staphylococcus aureus, whether from the beginning or as a post-viral phenomena, is the next common. Strep pyogenes and Mycoplasma pneumoniae also occur at this age. When we come to the school age group of more than 5 years age, then strep pneumonia is the commonest, Staph aureus may be the next, Strep pyogenes, H. influenzae, Mycoplasma pneumoniae, Chlamydia pneumoniae, and viruses may be in this particular order. Special situations, that was for those children who are immunocompetent, do not have any predisposing factors. However, if the child has an immunodeficiency, then gram-negative organisms or the unusual organisms can also be common. Severe malnutrition also is a condition in which the immune system does not work very well. So, they are also for this purpose taken as immune deficient. Post measles or post H1N1 type of state, Staphylococcus is more likely than other organisms. As far as ventilator associated pneumonia or nosocomial pneumonias are concerned, just as in adults, polymicrobial or commensals and unusual organisms are the most commonly picked up in these situations. When we are going to recognize a patient of pneumonia, the most consistent sign is tachypnea, and for various age groups that also has to be taken into consideration. 40 to 60 is the usual respiratory rate in children. In treatment, according to the age and the severity of pneumonia, the drug is chosen. We will talk about only severe pneumonia. Now, up to 3 months age, as we said, gram-negative organisms are common. Hence, the first line is injectable third-generation cephalosporins like cefotaxime or ceftriaxone, and generally an aminoglycoside like gentamicin or amikacin is also added. If for some reason we want to not choose these, then the second line would be injection comoxiclav if suggestion of organism of positive gram-positive is there. Else piperacillin tazobactam or cefoperazone sulbactam combination can be used. Suspected staphylococcal disease, if that is the scenario, then injection third generation cephalosporin must be combined with a cloxacillin or cefuroxime. Let us take an example of this 7-year-old child who had a trauma over his right knee 5 days before reporting to the hospital, and for the last 3 days he was having some respiratory distress. This patient was anxious, tachypnic, had a hypoxemia of 80% saturation, he was pale, pulse rate was 160 per minute, and had rashes over right limb. As you can see, the right limb is red and swollen all along maybe the saphenous vein. The X-ray showed multiple opacities on both sides. CT scan was suggestive of septic embolization into the lungs. This child was given IV antibiotics, condition deteriorated, he developed GI hemorrhage, right pneumothorax, was required ventilatory support, and he grew Staphylococcus aureus from his blood. This was when the chest tube had been put for the pneumothorax. On day 2 and 3 he was very sick. He was operated for osteomyelitis for the right tibia, multiple abscesses in both lower limbs, both hips on day 6. These are his MRI pictures showing abscesses all along his lower limbs. That is a tibial infarction on the left side. This saphenous vein was blocked because of septic thrombi, and this is the child after the surgery. And further, on the echocardiography showed normal cardiac function, but a thrombus at the junction of atrium and the inferior vena cava. He was treated with appropriate antibiotics in the sense that this was a MSSA, and he would receive cloxacillin for about 4 weeks, and by day 24 he was extubated and improving. So, children, when they have Staphylococcus infection, we can get a clue from a source which is outside the lungs, and that is why we could suspect from the beginning that this is likely to be a Staphylococcus as the infecting organism. This is how the X-rays later on showed further changes, again very characteristic of Staphylococcus infection. Now, if the child is 3 months to 5 years of age, first line antibiotic is ampicillin with or without gentamicin depending on the severity. Second line would be coamoxiclav or third generation cephalosporin, and if Staphylococcus is suspected, just as we said in the previous age group, cloxacillin should be added to third generation cephalosporins. A child who is more than 5 years, ampicillin can be the first line and coamoxiclav the second line, and if suspected Staphylococcus, we add cloxacillin. This is again to emphasize that vancomycin is kept in reserve. Our child ultimately required rifampicin and clindamycin also in the beginning because he had severe toxemia. If macrolides also have a place in the treatment of pneumonia, however, there should be considered only in these three specific situations. First, children with community acquired pneumonia with extrapulmonary manifestations like myocarditis, hemolytic anemia, glomerulonephritis, arthritis, CNS problems. These are the ones where we would suspect mycoplasma. Prolonged low-grade fever, cough not improving, less clinical signs, radiographs showing perihilar streaky infiltrates, consolidation, that could also be a sign of mycoplasma pneumonia. Non-response to first-line antibiotics in children who are immunized with HIV and pneumococcal vaccine and show no suppression on the X-rays and the CT scans, they are also likely to be suffering from mycoplasma pneumonia, and hence macrolides would be the drug of choice. Or we should switch to oral administration as soon as the patient can accept medications orally. Total duration usually is 5 to 7 days. However, if on second line therapy, then antibiotics should be given 7 to 10 days. If staphylococcal disease is suspected or confirmed, treat for 2 weeks at least in uncomplicated cases, and for 4 to 6 weeks for those with complications like empyema, metastatic abscesses, etc. Parenteral therapy is preferred at least till the fever settles down, or at least 7 days, whichever is later. So, at least for 7 days, patient has to be in the hospital receiving IV antibiotics. Chlamydia pneumonia is also something which is seen more commonly in specific age group, that is the early infancy. In this, cough is far more dominant symptom compared to fever or tachypnea or respiratory distress. Leukocytosis may be mild or not there at all, and the chest X-ray is likely to show the small patchy opacities, hyperinflation bilaterally, and some increase in bronchovascular markings. Large consolidations are commonly not seen in chlamydia pneumonia. Mycoplasma pneumonia occurs more commonly in school age, which means 5 years plus. However, it is reported in all age groups. Consolidation plus tracheobronchitis is the usual manifestation. It is called atypical pneumonia, mainly because of the characteristics of the organism and not entirely because of the characteristics of the disease process in the child. It responds to macrolides. Aspiration pneumonias are commonly seen in smaller children because many of them will have congenital anomalies of the palate, like a cleft palate, or tracheoesophageal fistula of H type, laryngotracheal cleft, where what is taken in the esophagus easily leaks out into the trachea. Or they may not be swallowing very well there because of pharyngeal incoordination, as patients with cerebral palsy, mental retardation, and several of other syndromes. Or they may have severe gastroesophageal reflux disease, where what is taken into the stomach rebounces back into the pharynx and may go into the trachea. Or some parents may be doing force feeding, during which the child can aspirate. Commonest organisms will be the oropharyngeal flora, including the anaerobes, and when seen in the CT scan or the X-ray, it is the posterior segments of the lungs which are more commonly involved. Clindamycin or piperacillin plus tazobactam are the commonly prescribed antibiotics in this situation, because we want to cover for anaerobes also. Cystic fibrosis is another condition seen in pediatric age group specifically. It is an autosomal recessive disease in which sweat chlorides are increased. It can be recognized and diagnosed fully by sweat chloride testing and the gene testing for a mutation, commonest mutation being delta 508. Recurrent or persistent bilateral pneumonias are the presentation. Soon, within a few years, the child develops bronchiectasis, as can be seen in this X-ray. Purulent secretions and sputum is what the child will bring out when he coughs. Normally, small children do not bring out sputum, but in this condition, even younger ones who are just 3-4 years will be bringing out sputum. Generally, a child of more than 6 to 8 years can bring out sputum, which can be tested. Staphylococcus and Pseudomonas are the typical organisms in this condition. Earlier age group, Staphylococcus more common, and as the child grows, Pseudomonas is what dominates. Burkholderia, Stenotrophomonas are also seen in this condition. These children have associated intestinal malabsorption and severe failure to thrive. This antibiotics are chosen accordingly to cover for Staphylococcus and Pseudomonas. Let us come to some other conditions which are again more commonly and specifically seen in children. Bronchiolitis is one of the most common ones of all. This is what we see in winter months in the northern part of India, and in the rest also it is seen in the comparatively colder days. It is a condition which is caused by viruses, most common virus being respiratory syncytial virus, parainfluenza virus, or the metapneumovirus. What actually happens is in the bronchioles, there is an exudation in the mucosa, leading to edema, narrowing, and some exudations because of which there is a blockage. The child presents with an obstructive airway disease. X-ray looks something like this. There are hyperinflated areas, there are areas of infiltrates, and then there are areas of collapse. For treatment, we have to first grade the bronchiolitis like mild, moderate, severe. The mild ones have mild tachypnea, they do not desaturate, while the severe ones, as listed here, would be desaturating, and the severe patients, those who have severe bronchiolitis, they can have frequent and prolonged apneas. Now, this is something which we must remember, that in children, when they are under stress, respiratory stress, they may not show dyspnea, they may not show retractions, they may instead show apneas, and these apneas can be so prolonged that for this sake itself you may have to ventilate the child. Grunting is another sign of lower respiratory tract involvement, commonly seen with pneumonias as well as bronchiolitis. Once you have made a diagnosis of viral bronchiolitis, for mild ones, no specific treatment is required. For moderate ones, we will read humidified oxygen, IV fluids, and its trial of adrenaline by nebulization is given. Many times it works, but not on all patients. If the patient improves, well and good. If it does not improve, then we treat it as severe bronchiolitis, in which we would be giving oxygen to maintain a saturation of more than 92%, intravenous fluids. Adrenaline, hypertonic saline of 3%, which is available to us, is also nebulized in such children. It is seen to be helpful in majority of patients, though not in all. Cardiorespiratory monitoring and all will have to continue. The treatment can be summarized in this way, that oxygen, IV fluids, and fever management and general care is of course required. Steroids, antibiotics, antivirals do not have a role. Now, although these are specific viral diseases, and for RSV we have drugs which can reverse, which can kill the virus, however, they have not been seen to be clinically useful. Earlier they were used in specific situations, now they have been more or less totally given up. What can be tried with some benefit is adrenaline nebulization, hypertonic saline, and a trial of bronchodilators by nebulizer or IV. The latest addition to the treatment of bronchiolitis is these: high flow nasal cannulas. This humidified high frequency, high flow nasal cannulas like the Airvo 2 deliver a air oxygen mixture which is humidified fully, which is heated fully, and comes under a strong flow. Because of this, probably a splinting of the bronchioles occurs and the child's respiratory distress settles down quickly. NIV can be used, and of course, if the condition warrants, conventional ventilation is also sometimes required. Now, let us take another example of a child who is 3 years old. This child came with sudden onset of noisy breathing for almost 12 hours or so, had low grade fever, sore throat, and wanted to sit and not lie down. He was able to swallow his fluids, solids also. He was not a toxic looking child. He had tachycardia, some degree of tachypnea, mild fever, and was not desaturating. If you can see, as in the upper part of the screen, this child is producing those cystic sounds, which is stridor, the inspiratory sound. Now, when the child was anxious, this is the sound he was producing. And when he was sitting quietly in the mother's lap, you can see that sound has more or less disappeared. So, we have to recognize the increasing severity. That was comparatively mild, because once the child was quietened, stridor was not there. That means it was not there at rest. However, in this particular video, you can see the child is more or less sleeping, or in fact is somewhat stuporous, and has got severe suprasternal retractions and is producing that stridor even when in this situation. In this one, you can see retractions and again the same sound. So this patient would require oxygen. If the patient has agitation or stupor, we can take it as a sign of severe disease. And the differential diagnosis in such situation would be retropharyngeal abscess, a peritonsillar abscess, CRU, which is laryngotracheobronchitis, a bacterial tracheitis, a foreign body obstruction in the upper airway, somewhere at the glottis, and epiglottitis. How do we differentiate these from one another is seen in the next slide. Three common ones are CRU, bacterial tracheitis, and retropharyngeal abscess. Stridor is present in all. Voice would become hoarse in CRU and bacterial tracheitis, but much less in retropharyngeal abscess. Dysphagia is the dominant symptom in retropharyngeal abscess, because the abscess is obstructing both the esophageal opening as well as the laryngeal opening. The cough is barky in CRU, in bacterial tracheitis also barky, and cough is not a major symptom in retropharyngeal abscess. Fever would be much more and toxicity would be much more in retropharyngeal abscess, because that is a bacterial condition, while CRU is mainly a viral one. X-ray is not needed when the clinical diagnosis is CRU or bacterial tracheitis. However, for retropharyngeal abscess, an X-ray may be helpful. So, we can classify these conditions as supraglottis, where a peritonsillar abscess, retropharyngeal abscess, epiglottitis would be seen. In this group, the major symptom in this would be drooling of saliva, dysphagia. In the infraglottic, laryngotracheobronchitis, bacterial tracheitis are the examples. No drooling of saliva, and the cough has a barking character. The emergency department management, the immediate management, once the patient arrives, a cool mist is to be given with or without oxygen. Aerosolized epinephrine, undiluted 3 to 5 ml. That is the ampoules that we have of 1 ml each. 3 to 5 ampoules have to be given, which appears to be a very large dose. It is not, because it is being nebulized. Corticosteroids, inhaled, oral, parenteral, all are effective, but when we give the inhaled corticosteroids, dose is much larger than what we would use in, let's say, asthma. So 2 milligram is the dose recommended for emergency management of CRU. Airway management, yes, that's what we have to be very careful. If the patient has severe obstruction, we will not use a paralyzing agent for intubation. Propofol can be a good agent to sedate the child if you need to intubate. So, severity of CRU has to be graded, and because the management would differ according to the severity. When the stridor is there at rest, it is more severe. When the respiratory distress is marked tachycardia and chest retractions are markedly present, then it's likely to be severe, and the severe disease patients would be desaturating, showing a saturation of less than 92%, and of course, if cyanosis is there, it is a clear sign of severe disease. The management would depend on the severity, and this is the algorithm that can be followed. Like for mild CRU, no specific treatment is required, just keep the child in the least, let's say, in a situation where the child is with the mother or with the caregiver and not with us, and is not howling, not shouting, not crying, that itself sometimes helps, as we had shown you in that video also. If the moderate severity, then oxygen would be required, steroids would be required, IV fluids may be required, and of course, we will be observing the child, monitoring the child for any deterioration. For severe croup, this is a child who is likely to be restless, and managing them can be a challenge. They would require oxygen, adrenaline by nebulization, steroids preferably in this situation to be given intravenously, and some of them may require ventilatory support also. If the patient does not improve or has other reasons, we may have to resort to a tracheostomy also. Let us take another example. This is a child who's got fever, high grade, and inspiratory stridor. The previous ones that we saw in the videos, those did not have any difficulty in swallowing, and you could see main symptom was stridor, and all of them were having laryngotracheobronchitis. Now, this is a child who is looking toxic, who has progressive stridor with respiratory distress. And if we follow this triangle approach, then we would describe this child's appearance as toxic, that we would say that his workup breathing is increased and his circulation is normal because he is not showing any cyanosis or any hypotension or any abnormalities of the pulse. This is the child. You can see that he is producing that sound and having retractions. This was his chest X-ray lateral view. It was suspected that this child, since he was having some drooling and difficulty in swallowing, we suspected retropharyngeal abscess. As you can see, the retropharyngeal space is widened, and if this space that has been outlined now on the screen, if this space is wider than the width of the vertebra in the lateral X-ray, we would say that this is widened. And this child, of course, had a huge, big retropharyngeal abscess, as can be seen in these CTs. The child was evaluated by an ENT surgical specialist. We were unable to intubate the child in the operating room. Tracheostomy had to be done because of that large abscess, and then incision and drainage of the abscess were done. The cultures were obtained, MSSA was grown, fluoxetine was given, and this is the child after the surgery. When should we suspect pertussis? When the cough is of long duration, 2 weeks or more, and it comes with spasms, paroxysms, and is accompanied by typical whoop or vomiting after the cough. Whoop is a special kind of sound which can be easily recognized if present, and that sound usually comes after a bout of cough. The child coughs something like this. That kind of sound he produces at the end of that is called a whoop. And pertussis can occur in immunized individuals also. This is what must be remembered. DPT is the vaccine that we use for small children. Almost all of them get it, and yet P is the weaker link of the DPT, and in spite of getting the vaccines, a few children can develop pertussis. A typical paroxysm consists of a series of rapid forced expirations followed by gasping inhalation, leading to typical whooping sound. Cyanosis, bulging of eyes, protrusion of the tongue, salivation, lacrimation, and distension of the neck veins occurs during the paroxysm. Paroxysms can be much longer than what I demonstrated. Post-essay vomiting is common, although not always seen. In fact, these paroxysms may occur several times per hour during both day and night. Attacks are triggered by yawning, sneezing, physical exertion, or maybe just like that. In partially immune, paroxysmal character is seen. Whoop and post-essay vomiting is common. Neonates or young infants with pertussis do not have typical paroxysms, nor they do show the whoop, nor do they show the post-essay vomiting. Instead, the presentation is unusual, that after a small bout of cough, or even sometimes without cough, they can go into apnea. They may go into respiratory failure, cyanosis, may have seizures, encephalopathy, or an acute life-threatening episode. These could be the manifestations of whooping cough in small infants and newborn period. When would a PICU admission required? All neonates and young infants. Severe paroxysms that interfere with feeding. Paroxysms presence of complications such as bacterial pneumonia, encephalopathy or CNS hemorrhage. Diagnosis is confirmed by complete blood counts. In routine, an absolute lymphocyte count of more than 10,000 may be fairly sensitive and specific in given clinical settings. A normal count, of course, does not exclude the diagnosis. Bordetella parapertussis, which is clinically seen as pertussis only, this usually does not cause leukocytosis. And neonates and young infants may sometimes show a very, very high WBC count of 30,000, 50,000, 60,000, generally with lymphocytic predominance. Treatment is aimed at reducing the transmissibility, may reduce symptoms if given in the first week of the disease process, and has limited role as usually the diagnosis of whooping cough is made later. However, if one child in the family is suffering from whooping cough and let's say the second his brother sister starts having similar symptoms, we can suspect the same thing has started, and in that child we could start early. What advantage this gives is that if we start the appropriate antibiotics, the child becomes non-infectious quickly. Drug chosen could be erythromycin, clarithromycin, azithromycin or cotrimoxazole. So generally speaking, macrolides, azithromycin is the drug of choice because it does not show any, it is cheaper, it is given once a day and does not show any drug interactions, can be given in children less than 1 month age also. One more condition, diphtheria. It is a respiratory problem in some patients at least. Sometimes it presents mainly as toxemia and fever, but the membrane that is seen, if it becomes large, it can obstruct the airways. It is caused by Corynebacterium diphtheri. We should suspect the diagnosis because the most common way of presenting is sore throat with greyish white patch on the tonsils and or pharynx, and this child will look toxemic. The closest differential diagnosis to this is streptococcal pharyngitis, streptococcal tonsillitis. Those children may have fever, but they usually do not look toxic. In diphtheria, child is toxic in disproportionate to his fever. There is bleeding when the membrane is removed. The cervical lymph nodes may be large, sometimes so large that they give an appearance of a bull neck appearance. The other modes of presentation are stridor, serosanguinous nasal discharge when there is a membrane in the nose, myocardial involvement will lead to manifestations of myocarditis. Palatal and bulbar palsy can occur a few days after the onset, and acute flaccid paralysis a few weeks after the onset of diphtheria. Diagnosis can be confirmed by demonstrating the organism from the membrane by Albert stain, which is a specific stain for this. This is something which takes just a few minutes, maybe an hour or so, we should have the report. Selective media can be used to culture this. Loeffler-Sizzi, still the standard that is used. Treatment, it is very responsive to penicillin G. However, if the patient has already gone into a stage where it's toxemia and all, mortality can be high. Ampicillin, amoxicillin can be used, erythromycin can be used. In all children who are diagnosed as diphtheria, diphtheria antitoxin has to be administered. Child has to be isolated and he has to be watched for airway compromise and myocarditis and CNS involvement. The doses of diphtheria antitoxin are given here. Total dose, if for nasal it is much less, for laryngeal and pharyngeal it is somewhat more, but if it is a combined type or the patient has severe disease, 80,000 to 1 lakh units may be required. And in extensive disease for disease of more than 3 days, yes, large doses are required. The antitoxin should be preferably given as a single dose intravenously, diluted 1:20 in isotonic saline and given at a rate of 1 ml per minute slowly. Serum sickness develops in 10% of the patients. Antidiphtheric serum is available only at hospitals dealing with infectious illnesses. It's available as a 10 ml ampule which contains 10,000 units, which means that in severe disease you may require 6 to 10 ampules. Febrile seizures. Now we shift to CNS disease. In CNS, meningitis is a common illness that is still seen in pediatric age group in the ICUs. However, febrile seizures are probably even more common. This entity is seen mainly in the age group of 6 months to 3 years. What happens is with an ordinary fever, in fact just at the beginning of the fever, there is generalized tonic-clonic seizure, which can even present as prolonged seizure of status epilepticus. Generally speaking, in between the seizures, child looks good in the sense he has fever, but is fully conscious and sometimes even cheerful. Recurrences can occur with episodes of fever today, and then suppose a month later or 2 months later, every time the child has fever, this child is more prone to develop these convulsions. CSF is normal, CNS imaging is normal, which indicates that there is no direct insult to the brain. Antibiotics are to be given only if we diagnose that this fever is because of a bacterial disease. Otherwise, usually these are viral illnesses which have led to convulsions, and no antibiotics are required. About the gastrointestinal system, diarrhea still is the second commonest illness which results in mortality across the world. Respiratory illnesses are slightly more common than diarrhea and gastroenteritis when we are talking about mortality. It can result in severe dehydration, hypovolemic shock, electrolyte disturbances. Children are more prone to these complications compared to adults. They have a much larger extracellular fluid space. Getting an IV access can be a big challenge in these situations, and for that intraosseous access can save the child. What we have to do in this situation is, if we are not getting a intravenous line, let's say in 30 seconds, maybe 60 to 90 seconds, that's it. We should use a bone marrow needle type of needle. A specific intraosseous needle is there. If that is not available, a bone marrow aspiration needle can be used. It can be inserted just below the tibial tuberosity, either side, just below and just medial to the tibial tuberosity, and here a good access will be obtained into the bone marrow space. Any fluid, any drug, even blood transfusions can be given safely into this at a reasonably good rate. And as soon as possible, after that, as soon as other facilities are available, we can get an intravenous line, and then the intraosseous can be stopped. The child usually responds very well to appropriate fluids when this is the cause for hypovolemic shock. Often this is of viral etiology, commonest virus being the rotavirus. Antibiotics would be required if clinically we can diagnose sepsis, if there is associated urinary tract infection or pneumonia, for a child who is less than 3 months age, or if we see blood in stools. These are the indications for starting antibiotics, and ceftriaxone is the drug of choice generally. So these are some of the infections that we see in children, younger ones especially, which are somewhat different, either totally different in the sense that they are seen only in these age groups, or they have some different manifestations or different ways in which we have to treat. That's what we have tried to summarize in this talk. Thank you.